Okay, so part of brain development, or learning is part of brain development. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how this learning takes place. It's going to get a little bit technical, but I want you just to bear with me because I think having an understanding of how learning happens is going to help to develop your own learning behaviors and to help children develop these. So a neural pathway is really the when learning takes place, we develop neural pathways, right? And these are comprised of neurons. And so neurons, if you think about neurons in our brain, basically, um, is our brain is made up of like 100 million neurons, and I'm not even exaggerating, 100 million neurons. And so there's like trillions of neural connections. Sorry, I can't say that right. So, okay, so in our brain we have neurons and they're connected by dendrites. So I think of this like a little bubble is the neuron. Then we have a rope, which is the dendrite, and it connects it to another neuron. So we have these connections. These are created, these neurons and dendrites and the connections are created by our brain depending on our habits and behaviors. So the more we do something, the more these bubbles and ropes will be created. So if you watch Inside Out, I always think of it when the little girl has a new memory, a new bubble or a new little glass bubble comes into her memory bank. So it's similar to the way neurons are developed. If you take on a new sport, for example, you'll create almost like a little neuron or dendrite that is for sport. And so the more we do something, the number of times we do the same thing, the more frequent we do the behavior, the more we're developing these kinds of neurons and dendrites. So think of this neural pathways as deep grooves. So these pathways are deep grooves in our brain. The more we do something, the more these grooves get deeper and deeper and deeper because our brain is taking on this habit and behavior as something we're doing often. So we're having this constant kind of using this neural pathway to play soccer. I mean, using this neural pathway to play soccer again and again and again. And the more we do it, the deeper the groove becomes and the better we become at that type of behavior. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes. So that neural pathway gets deeper and deeper, and it's faster for us to then develop that skill, develop a new skill. So I hope you understood what I said. And I try to do it as basic as possible. Again, if you have time, watch a video about how learning takes place. It basically is about us creating these hundreds and thousands and billions and trillions of neural pathways in our brains that help us to be better at a skill or um or become faster at the skill. So with enough repetition, these types of behaviors become automatic. So things like reading and driving, those things have become automatic because the neural pathway is deep. We've done it often. So just because you have a neural pathway doesn't mean that you have to, that's a habit you're stuck with forever. So sometimes we can train our brains to create new neural pathways. So instead of doing something one way, we can train our brain to do it another way. So think of a child when they enter your class, the more you do the ABCs, the repetition of the ABCs over and over and over becomes part of them. So it's automatic when they hear A, they can sing A, B, C, D, E because that neural pathway is so deep. So in terms of repetition, if you're thinking about repetition, it takes about 10,000 repetitions to master a skill. Okay, so not to learn a skill, but to master a skill and develop that neural pathway. 10,000 repetitions. So that's when you become a master of something. So you need to you kind of encourage your children to repeat. I'm not saying they necessarily have to learn everything in parrot fashion, but there's parts of learning that you can do in repetition format in order for them to develop that skill and that neural pathway to be created. Because it takes about 3 to 6 months for a new behavior to become a habit. Obviously, it's different from person to person, but in about 3 to 6 months, a behavior can start to become a habit because you're practicing it over and over and over. And it'll become part of who you are. And so this is something that's interesting for you as teachers to think about because we want our children to develop those kinds of behaviors and those kinds of learning habits, if I can call it that. So connecting a new behavior, when you're connecting a new behavior, a new way of thinking about something, you must try to do it as in as many ways as possible. So you can tap into the five senses. You can use the hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch, all of those things. They help to create a neural pathway. So this is where experiential learning comes in. If you have a child touching something, feeling something, smelling something, they are more likely to be more connected to that learning, more likely to more easily do it. That's why when kids are small, we have them write out the alphabet and then use their finger and kind of go over the alphabet and say it and hear it, because that is connecting it with many senses. So they're more likely to remember it and to be able to then say it the next day. You think about something that happened in your life when there was a sense, when it was something um, that you learned. Oftentimes you can almost imagine yourself in the class. You can even remember what you were thinking, what you were hearing when you learned that, or when something happened to you. It's because our senses are involved, and our senses makes it easier for us to learn things. So a long explanation, I'm sorry about that, but I wanted you to just grasp that, because it's very helpful for you as a teacher to know. So the cognitive domain, it involves the development of our mental skills, as we said, and the acquisition of knowledge. And there's categories under this domain. So if you just remember Bloom's when I'm talking about this, right? So the first one is knowledge. Then there's comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and of course evaluation. So doesn't that sound very similar to Bloom's? So when you look at it here, they call it remembering, creating, evaluating, understanding, applying, and analyzing. If you think about what I told you about now, if we just think of remembering at your most basic level part of your brain, remember this part here. When we think about remembering, it's a very basic function. It happens here. And this part here, your sorry, now I'm getting the word, your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is involved in um memory. So it's this very part, this part of the brain here. So if your hypothalamus is damaged, or it's in shock from trauma, you're going to have a challenge remembering things. So that part of your basal or basic survival part of your brain, that's where that happens. Then over here is where, remember the limbic system, or the limbic brain, rather, it's your emotions and also memories come from. This is where we're more analyzing. So think about emotions and analyzing. And then this part of the brain here, which remember is your new brain, the human brain, the neocortex. That is where you start evaluating, understanding, applying. And this is why they call it higher order thinking, because it's using the higher part of your brain and not just the basic part of your brain. So it's the top part. And this is where skills become more applicable, is the top part of your brain. This is why the higher level of Bloom's taxonomy. So remember this here. This is the hierarchy of cognitive domains, as I was mentioning now. This is where Bloom's comes from. And this is all part of your cognitive domain. Take a minute to look at that. This is where your learning starts to build upon each other. It's not saying that this level is less important than that on top, but you need this level to build these upon. So this actually means that this is quite important, as they all are. And this is a very progressive, it goes from one level to the next. And so as you are able to build knowledge, you then can use that knowledge and learn how to comprehend the knowledge that you've just acquired and able to remember, and then building on application and analysis. So this is where Bloom's comes from, because Bloom's taxonomy is focusing on describing the levels of attainment rather than just saying, okay, you need to remember this, but describing what does this look like. That is what Bloom says. What does knowledge look like? How do we describe it? And how does a child then move from one level to the next? Okay, so just ending off this, I've spoken a lot about the cognitive domain. I've gone into a lot of detail. I hope that you have a better understanding. Also, if you read the document or the journal article by Dr. Hoke, it will give you more of insight into this cognitive domain. So the affective domain, it involves our feelings, our attitudes, our emotions. It's involved with the way we deal with things emotionally, such as our feelings, our values, appreciation, motivations, enthusiasms, and attitudes. So when we think of learning, and I'm talking about this domain in terms of learning, when we think of learning, we usually think of it as an intellectual function or a mental function, but learning is not just about this mental or what did I say, intellectual function. You can also learn things like the attitudes, behaviors, and physical skills. So our affective domain involves things like feelings, emotions, and attitudes. It talks about the way in which we connect with things emotionally, and how connecting with things emotionally actually helps you to remember them and hold them within your brain. Because remember, when we spoke about that middle brain, when we spoke about the limbic brain, we spoke about that there's also memory, there's also recalling things and analyzing. So that is also important for us to remember that memory sits there as well, and that's connected usually to emotion and the way we feel about things, the way we have attitudes about something. So the domain is, like, as you can see, it's broken up into five different domains, from receiving, attending, to responding, valued, organizing, and characterizing. I'm not going to go through this. It is in the journal article. It's also on here, as you can see here, explained. So go through that and look at how you understand it. And then if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to come back to me. Just another point here is that this domain is really a hierarchical structure. So as you can see, it's moves from more simple feelings to more complex feelings. And the structure is based on the process of internalizing. How do we take things from outside and bring it into ourselves? And how, when we bring it into ourselves, how do we do it? How do we hold that memory? How do we keep it? And how does it affect the way we then respond using that information? Okay. So that's the end of the affective domain. I'm going to now move on to the model domain. This is the domain of model development. Also, I'm not going to go into this. I just wanted to give a brief look at it. You can look at the theorist Kohlberg, and Kohlberg talks about model development in various ways. Please take some time to read this. I just really wanted to introduce you to the domain. Okay, so now we move to the psychomotive domain, or the physical domain. Remember, we can also learn through our bodies, the way our bodies and senses bring information to us. And so these types of learning happens when we physically interact with our environment. It's to do with movement, where your gross and fine muscles are used to interpret or to express emotions and to bring it into your consciousness and into understanding. So this area also refers to the natural and automatic responses or reflexes. And the psychomotor domain is made up of using your motor skills and coordinating them in a specific way. And this is broken up into 7 categories. And you can, of course, read the 7 categories. I don't want to go into it as well because we don't have the time or the video space. But that's just a brief mention of the various categories within the physical domain. I usually say this in all my videos, just in a quick aside. I'm sorry that I say so much. It's just a very bad habit. I need to break that neural pathway, so I must apologize for that. So when we talk about physical development, we can look at the stages that children go through. This is nice for you also to read and to look at what happens from 6 months to 12 months, from 1 year, and so on and so forth. I'd now like to talk about physical development in relation to fine and gross motor development. For you as teachers, I think it's extremely important that you understand fine and gross motor skills, because it's when it's not there, it's something you will notice in the classroom. Children struggle to write when they struggle to read. It's based on fine and gross motor skills. So when we talk about fine motor skills, it's about picking up beads. It's about being able to hold a pen correctly. It's about being able to tie your shoelaces, close your buttons. It's about those small movements. So it's about, giving kids activities to do. So recently I've given my daughter an activity. I took a foam cup and made a hole in it, and she had to push beans through there. That helps to develop those fine motor skills, because they have to pick up. It involves coordinated efforts between the brain and the muscles. Fine motor skills are built on gross motor skills, and the gross motor skills allow us to make bigger movements. And usually all of this comes very naturally. We don't even have to think about it, but they do develop in childhood. And we use gross motor skills every day because we use our large muscles. So things from exercising, walking, raking leaves, most of these skills are just things that you don't even think about, you just do it. And most people use skills easily and automatically. These skills, fine skills and gross motor skills, are a lot more complex than you think they are. It takes a lot of coordination between the muscles and your neurological system, and it affects things like balance and coordination. And there's a joke in my family that I definitely have poor gross motor skills. I didn't play in the park enough. I didn't jump and run enough because I'm very, very clumsy. Okay, I'm going to continue in the next video.